Welcome back to Tanya in 5. The last few days we have been studying chapter 1 of book 2 of Tanya, Shaar, HaYichud, VeHoEmuna, the gateway of unity and faith. As we explained in the introduction, the objective of this book 2 of Tanya, is to explain and understand to the best of our ability the oneness and unity of God. Now, the Zohar states that there are two levels to divine unity: the higher unity and the lower unity. Now we need to understand, how is it possible that there are levels of unity, and what is the higher one, what is the lower one, and what could possibly be the difference between levels of unity? Is unity not just unity? So to explain this, the Alter Rebbe begins with the following premise. When we say God's oneness, we don't simply mean that there is one God and not two, God forbid. That's not what we mean when we say God is one. What we mean is that He is the only existence, and nothing else exists. That is true unity. Because if we were to say, God forbid, that there are two existences, God and something else, then that would be a limitation on God's existence. His existence only extends so far as He's not encroaching on the other existence. And that would certainly put a limitation on His oneness or unity, because His existence is conditional in the limitations of Him not extending into the other existence. So true unity therefore means an absolute oneness, therefore means that He is the only reality, not comprised of any parts, and not limited by any other existence. Now obviously the big question then is, well, what's the world doing here? We look around and we observe an existence. And there is where the levels of unity come in. The levels of unity are two approaches, or two levels, to understanding how it is that the entirety of our universe and everything that exists does not pose a contradiction to divine unity. In that, our existence and all the worlds are completely of no existence in the face of God, completely nullified and surrendered within the divine. And that are the two levels. To what degree and in what way do I understand that this world is nothing to God and therefore does not pose a contradiction to God's absolute unity? So phase 1 is laid out in chapter 1 as follows. When God created the world, as described in the beginning of Genesis, the metaphor there, or the language there is used, is words. God spoke 10 utterances, and that's how God created the world. So explains the Alter Rebbe that these utterances, these words that God spoke, are like transmitters of energy. They transmit the divine energy to be invested within creation to bring it into being. Now this transmission of energy that God invests through the words into creation did not just happen once at the beginning of creation and now the world is on autopilot, but rather this divine words that transmit the divine energy to be invested within creation is a continuous process. These words are continuously being spoken by God and continuously animating our world to bring it into being. And were these words to, God forbid, revert back to their source, if God were to take back the words and the energy contained therein and would be consumed back in their source in God Himself, then the world would revert back to the way it was prior to creation, which is absolute nothingness. Let me explain this. It's not merely that if God were to remove His energy from our world, the world would be destroyed. Destroyed implies that the world exists, God is stronger, and He destroys it. That's not what's happening here. It's not that God is stronger than our world. It's that our world is conditional to His investure of energy. And the moment He removes His energy, it ceases to exist. Not because it's being destroyed, but because it's ceasing to exist. Like if you pull the plug out of a light bulb, the light just stops existing because its source stops to flow into it. The electric current stops flowing into it. So likewise, all of creation at its very core is continuously and currently being brought into being by the divine, and if, God forbid, God were to retract his energy, the world would revert back to the way it was prior to God's investure, which is absolute nothingness. As I mentioned, the medium by which this energy is invested in creation is the words of God. So the word and the name of something, as it's described in the Holy Tongue, in classical biblical Hebrew, that is the container which transmits, the conduit that transmits the divine energy to keep that item alive. And all of these words get their power by a system of evolution from the original words written in Torah, with all of their intense power to create something from nothing. The takeaway from all of this is two things. Number one, know how precious your Jewish name is. Those words, those letters that comprise your Jewish name, is the conduit to bring the divine energy into you to keep you alive right now. Number one. Number two, there cannot be anything that is a contradiction to fulfilling God's will. Because everything that exists is being brought into being currently by God, and therefore could not be a contradiction to what he wants. The only question is, what does God want me to do with the situation he's creating for me right now? Looking forward to seeing you when we conclude chapter 2.